Welcome to Eastside Online. I cannot believe that we're a couple weeks away from being here in this church again. When I first heard the date that was coming, that we would be here in late May, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I had this type of joy that almost exploded out of me. And it's because we get to welcome our family home. Even though there's gonna be some social distancing and a lot of cleaning, we get to be here together. And I don't know if you guys have forgot, but some people search their entire life to witness some of the things that we experience every weekend at Eastside. And so my second feeling was a feeling of nostalgia. Are we gonna be able to witness that again? Are we gonna be able to see the lives changed, the children and families, the marriages that are saved? And I believe that we are gonna see so much more than we can even hope or imagine. So guys, couple weeks, it's gonna happen. We will be back in this building. At this time, I just wanna say our service, we have so many great things planned today. If you wanna go prepare communion, you can go do that. We're gonna have worship and Dave's gonna be bringing the word. But I also wanna give you one final challenge. I want you to go on, if you're on Facebook or YouTube, I want you to share this week's message. Because I believe when we share that message, we give other people an opportunity to hear the name of Jesus. I mean, when you share the service, it's like you're inviting every one of your friends to know who Jesus is. So go ahead and do that. There's no greater thing in life than to be part of God's Great Commission. So grateful you are here today. We love you and have a great service.
working. Never stop working. Never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. Never stop working. Never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. Never stop working. Never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. Never stop working. Never stop. You always make miracle working, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are way making miracle working, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. When darkness tries to roll over my bones, the sorrow comes to steal the joy I hold. Brokenness and pain is all I know. I won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I am not a captive to the lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. And I won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My
Night was falling over the orphanage in Bristol, England. The man who had started the orphanage was a man by the name of George Mueller. George Mueller had this orphanage of over 100 kids, and his wife showed up one night saying, "George, we don't have any milk for the kids." Money was always tight when he served because him and his wife made it a priority to never ask for financial help or to borrow. So they knew what it looked like to have nights where they didn't have enough. He immediately put down his pen in that moment, took his wife's hand, and went to the 2 other workers in the orphanage. At that moment, he looked at them and said, "If we trust God, we really believe in him, trust his provision, then he will always provide." Then they bowed their heads and they prayed. During the prayer, they heard a knock at the door. George went, answered the door, and had an envelope in his hand. Mary said quickly, "Hey, open it. What's inside?" When he opened it, he saw a sum of money. They counted it and realized it was enough for them to provide milk for the kids in the morning. So as they celebrated, another knock came at the door. Yet again, another envelope. They opened it up, and it was another sum of money. And as they celebrated and prayed even more, they received one more knock, and there was an envelope and even more money than before. You see, this story is significant because here's a man who decided to make a difference. He went before God and he prayed consistently, truly believing in the power of God. I remember something that he said when reading and studying for this communion meditation. He had said this, that he prayed that God would move in the hearts of men, that they would provide his daily needs. And that's like the challenge I have for you, that God would move in your heart as we come into this time of communion. Move you if there's a spirit of sin and struggle or insecurity, that you remember what he did on that cross for you, and you're changed. You're moved forward, and you believe in his power. Because if you do that, everything's going to turn out all right. Let's have a moment of prayer. God, thank you again for your provision. Thank you for the words of George Mueller and how he trusted so deeply in your help that you would show up in a time of need. God, let us believe that you can do that same thing in our lives, that same power that was called upon by George can be called upon by us. Father, I don't know exactly what we are going through, but I do know that we all have things we have to bring before your presence. I pray we take those struggles, we take those sins, we take those insecurities, and we drop them at the altar because of the cross, because of what happened on that piece of wood through the blood of Christ. Thank you so much for Jesus. We love you, and we pray this all in his name. Amen.
When the music fades and all is stripped away in a simply come, longing just to breathe something that's a word that will bless your heart, bring you more than a song. For a song in itself is not what you ever require. You search much deeper within to the way things appear, and looking into my heart, I'm coming back to the heart of worship. When it's all about you when it's all about you. All about you, Jesus.
Hey, Eastside Online, thanks for checking in with us today. We are glad that you're here. As Winston mentioned, 2 weekends from now, we're moving back into our building. We're beginning the transition of having on-site services at our Veterans Parkway campus. And so what that means is we have 2 more weeks of being an online church only. And then 2 weekends from now, we will then make that transition of being an online and on-site church. And so we've got to start thinking that way and understanding it in that context, online and on-site. But 2 weekends now, we've got this opportunity to have 2 more of these online-only services. Now, I've learned enough during all of this that once I make a decision or a determination about something, a couple minutes later, I'll have a bit of information that makes it irrelevant, and I got to switch it. So at this minute, what we know is we've got 2 more weekends online, and then we become an online and on-site church, and we are ready for that, and I hope you are too. Now, I want to invite you today to go and join me on an emotional page for myself, and I sincerely believe that as I talk about these things today, that the messages that we're going to talk about over these next 2 weeks are among the most critical, maybe some of the most important messages that I've ever delivered here at Eastside. I really believe that with all my heart. Most of you know, if you're an Eastsider, that we plan out our messages for the whole year. And so we've done that plan for a number of months now. It's been a great plan. But the remainder of the year up through the summer, that's all been shelved. We've put it away. And we've been asking God, what do you want us to hear right now? What do you want us to learn this minute in the crazy world in which we're living? And so as I've thought through that and prayed about it, God has continually been leading me back to a particular day in the life of Jesus. And on that particular day, he was receiving criticism and negativity and conflict at every angle. And every time I prayed about this and thought about it, God just kept saying, go back to that, go back to that, go back to that. And I have been diving into that for a few days now and looking at that day in the life of Jesus when he began to present a strategy about how we are to react to change. When our world just turns upside down, Jesus taught us something on that particular day that I believe it is the message of the moment for us here at Eastside. Now, this day that we're talking about is found in Matthew chapter 9. And so if you ever want to read that chapter, you'd go to this day in which I'm talking about. And what we find there is this conflict and criticism is just, it's just rapid fire at Jesus on that day. And I don't want you to miss that because I think that's a powerful thing to remember. And I want to say it this way. Sometimes the greatest mess leads to the greatest message. And don't forget that. If you feel right now that things are just kind of topsy-turvy for you and nothing's just really stable anymore and you're wondering in the mess, listen, those sometimes are the greatest times that we learn a message from God. And so here Jesus is in chapter 9 and all that's starting to come to him, and he shows up in his hometown of Capernaum. You go back into the first verse, you find he shows up in Capernaum, his base, where he kind of camps out. He was born, as you know, Bethlehem. He raised up as a young boy in Nazareth, but Capernaum is where he was as an adult. That was home base, and these were his people. You would think he would show up and there'd be parades and excitement. Man, it was nothing like that. They're just criticizing, attacking, and coming at him at every angle. He shows up in town, and early in the 9th chapter, a paralytic is brought to him, a guy who was totally paralyzed. Jesus heals him and forgave him his sins. He's walking and forgiven, and there were religious big shots in the area that just jumped on that. Who are you to forgive sins? That's blasphemy. Only God could do it. Man, Jesus was so much more tender than me, because if I received that, I'd been right back. You mean to tell me, guys, that instead of being happy that a guy can walk and isn't an invalid for the rest of his life, you're more upset that I forgave his sin? Really? But Jesus was way more graceful. And he had a brief conversation with them and moved on. He ran into a guy by the name of Matthew. That's the next story in the 9th chapter. Matthew is a Jewish tax collector for the Roman Empire. Who likes tax collectors? Nobody, but Jesus did. That says something about Jesus, I think is really a beautiful thought to remember about, is that Jesus sees potential in people when other people only see problems. Man, I hope that resonates with you. If everybody looks at you and just sees a mess, Jesus sees potential. And he said to Matthew, I want you to follow me. They go to Matthew's house, they have dinner, and there's the religious big shots watching it all. Can you believe who he eats with? He eats with tax collectors and sinners. Once again, Jesus is way more tender than me. Man, I would have went crazy. I would have went out in the lawn. You mean to tell me that you guys, the religious dudes, you guys are upset that I'm showing attention to somebody that everybody else ignores? You're mad about that? Really? But he was way more graceful. Brief conversation, he moves on. He ran into some followers of John the Baptist. They were on the same team. John the Baptist, Jesus, those who followed, they were on the same team. And these guys start attacking Jesus. They said, man, we have to do all these fasts. We got to fast today, we got to fast tomorrow, we're going to fast next week. We look at your disciples, they're not fasting at all. And Jesus takes the heat from them, and then he gives a logical answer to it and kind of works through it. And then there's this interesting pause. You can kind of read it when you're reading through chapter 9, you get to this point, and there's just this interesting pause. And it's almost like Jesus took a breath. You know, I'm back in my hometown. Everybody's coming at me. And he stops, and he issues a teaching that may be one of his most powerful teachings in all of his life. In the 16th verse, he said this: no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Now, we don't do that today. We buy clothes with holes in them. And if we get a piece of clothing that gets a hole in it, we don't want a hole, what do? We throw it away and go buy something else. Not then. They'd patch it up. So they'd get a new piece of material and they'd put it on the hole of the shirt. But if the new piece of material was new, it hadn't shrunk, it hadn't grown in age, and it'll start to shrink and the hole will be worse. And Jesus said, now, if that's not resonating, you're not catching the point. He said, let me give you another analogy. And in the next verse, he said this: neither do men pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst and the wine will run out and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins and both are preserved. And in that day, they had containers for liquid, and it was often the skins of animals they'd butchered. Many times it was a goat, and after the goat was butchered, they turned the skin inside out and the liquid would go in. They'd pour wine in there, and over time those skins would get old and crusty and kind of unpliable, inflexible, and you'd pour new wine into it that hadn't fermented yet, and in the fermentation process the wine expands, and because the skins are all dried up, they burst. Now, I've never fermented wine in an animal skin, but I've done something real similar to it. I'm a golfer, as many of you know, and golfers love new golf gloves because they're soft and they're pliable and you're flexible, and you can stick your hand in there and the hand just kind of forms to the fingers. Man, it just feels so good, and that's the way it ought to be. And every golfer will have somewhere in his bag an old golf glove that he forgot about. It's been in there for a couple years, and they take it out, and it's old and it's crusty and it's kind of cracking and it's inflexible, and if you stick your fingers in it, the glove literally sometimes will just split apart. What in the world is all that about? What in the world is Jesus trying to say in the middle of these two analogies that he brings? I want to suggest that he's unfolding one of God's most glorious strategies in how God works in our lives. Watch, that there will be times in which God will introduce the new into your life. New opportunities, new challenges, new directions, new chapters. That God wants something new to be happening in you and around you. And if you're holding on to the inflexibility of the past without a willingness to change and be open to what new God wants in your life, you end up missing all of it. The power of it is this: to learn to pay attention when God points in a new direction. Now, God's never going to point in a direction that is inconsistent with his will. I remember a lady many years ago came to a counseling session with me, told me she felt God was leading her to leave her husband and to hook up with another man married to another wife. I said, ma'am, let me tell you something. That was either Satan or a bad taco, but it sure wasn't God, because God will never contradict his word. But watch this, he'll contradict you. He'll mess in your life a little bit to bring some newness in there. And if you're not pliable and flexible and moldable and open to the leading of God, you end up missing all of it. And that's what was happening to the people in chapter 9. They were missing the newness of Jesus. They were old, crusty wineskins. And they missed it all right in front of their face. Now, I want to take a breath here and I want to share something with you. I tried really hard in all my ministries to be honest and transparent when I preach. I try my best that when I preach a principle, I want to know, am I working through it? Is it happening for me? And I just want you to know, I was like everybody. I'm not better than anyone. And so I take the principles that God has led me to teach and I ask, well, how's that happening in my life before I preach? And sometimes I do pretty good with it, and sometimes I just stink at it. And so this week, as I've worked through this concept that I want to talk about for a couple weeks before we begin kind of our new chapter here at Eastside, I started asking, well, what does that have to do with me? And I want to take a risk and be transparent with you today. Probably a little more transparent than I'm comfortable with. And my prayer is that you are graceful to the story that I'm going to share with you about my life. This weekend is a pretty special weekend for Susan and I. 40 years ago this weekend, exactly 40 years ago, I entered the preaching ministry. And I've been preaching every weekend since then for 40 years. I know some of y'all thinking, man, that is a lot of hot air. And it's a lot of hot air. We were talking about it the other night, and we were remembering that first job that I got as a preacher. And Susan was working with a lady who was married to an elder in a church. And so Susan talked to the lady, and the lady talked to her husband, the elder, and the elder got a hold of me, and voila, I got a job, because two conniving ladies convinced the church to hire a 19-year-old kid to be their preacher. And that was 40 years ago now. God has blessed me since then to serve 5 wonderful churches. That little church in West Central Indiana where I started, and then a couple congregations in Illinois. I served a congregation in Kentucky, and now I'm back here in Indiana at Eastside for the last several years. And all that adds up to 40 years, and I wouldn't trade any of it. But I want to tell you something with you in a spirit of transparency. Since day one, there has been this internal driving, this pounding in my spirit that I have no ability to even explain what that is. This leaning, this strong leaning to be a part of a large church, to serve in a large congregation, reaching masses of people. And that has been placed in me all the way back at day one. I've had to struggle through the potential of that being based on pride. And I've worked through that on many times. Every preacher would love to be a part of a church reaching masses of people for Jesus. And if they tell you they have no interest in it, they're lying about it. Every preacher wants that. And for me, it has been almost an unbearable pounding within my spirit in all these years. I think I could say with total honesty that the reason almost never had anything to do with pride. I just know what Jesus has done for me. And I just want as many people as possible to experience what he has done for me. And for decades, I have been wrestling with that. Sometimes I think pride worked its way to the surface. And fortunately for me, God has surrounded me with mentors and close friends and a tender wife who could bring those things up and lovingly get me back on the right track. But for the most part, I just want people to know Jesus. I just want them to experience what Jesus has done for me. And so the bad part about that is, in 40 years, if that's not happening, if people aren't coming to Jesus in great number, it would really throw me into depression. And I don't mean to the point where I needed therapy or it became medical where I needed pharmaceuticals. I don't mean any of that. I just mean that, man, I would get so bummed out. I remember that little church we started at in West Central Illinois. I remember the weekend when we first hit 50 people. We'd never had 50 people in church. And man, we were celebrating. It was the greatest thing on the earth. But what that did for me was every weekend now that we did not hit 50, I became bummed. They 50 this week, and next week we have 39 people, and I'm in a bad mood all week long. And for 40 years, I've wrestled with that. And most people don't know anything about it. In those early days, I would begin to think about what it would be like to be in a ministry like that. And I would talk to people and learn about it and read about it, and I'd pray about it and plead with God that you'd bring it about. And I discovered there's some things that's got to happen. You got to be in a metropolitan area. You can't reach masses in a community of 24 people. And so we end up in the Louisville, Kentucky area, in this metro area of southern Indiana and northern Kentucky area. I figured there were certain things that had to happen. I had to be a hard worker. I know the jokes about preachers. I've heard them all. You know, you get paid, you work 1 hour a week on Sunday, and that might be true somewhere. Gang, that has never been true for me. That I knew it would take an incredible amount of effort and energy on my part, and I willingly gave that, sometimes to the sacrifice of my family. And that is a regret that I will live with until the day that I die. But I knew this urging in my heart, this leaning in me to reach masses of people for Jesus, that it would require of that of me. I knew there were several pieces of the puzzle that had to come together. There needed to be a wise and supportive eldership working with me. There needed to be a staff, a team of people who worked hard together, who loved each other, who cheered for each other, who never fought with each other. There needed to be a congregation that was supportive and standing and trusting with leaders and forgiving when they made decisions that didn't turn out right. I knew all of those things had to happen, but I knew above all of them, the favor of God had to rest. That in order to experience something like this, you can be in the right spot, you can have the right work ethic, you can have the right team and the right elders and the right congregation, but if the favor of God doesn't rest, then none of this happens. I knew all that had to happen, and I don't have the words. I hope you can sense it in my transparency. I don't have the words to tell you how unusual it is for all of that to happen. There are not very many places ever experience that. And for 40 years, I've longed for it. I was listening to a report a couple weeks ago on the news about churches reopening their buildings. And at that time in America, we were kind of thinking that the guidelines were going to be churches can open with 100 people or less. And so that was kind of the buzz back then. And the reporter made this statement that 85% of churches in America can open right now under that guidelines. Why? Because 85% are under 100 people. It is unusual for a place to reach the masses, and I have longed for it for 40 years. There have been times when I felt we were close. There were times in which I sensed that I can peek into the window. I can see it. It's right there. And then something would happen, and Satan would do something, and it would stop. For 40 years, I've longed for that. But But then without even seeing it come on the horizon, it happened. Right here. Right under our nose, almost overnight, all the pieces came together and the favor of God began to explode and the floodgates opened up with masses of people finding out who Jesus was right here in the midst of us. I vividly remember last Christmas, just a few months ago, sitting in my office all along and realizing it took 40 years. And you let me see this. And then quicker than it ever came, it was gone. An invisible virus took it all away in one weekend. Our staff have been trying really hard to get a hold of as many of our people as possible. How you doing? Checking on people. And it's been so tender to me that many have responded to me, well, how are you doing? Let me tell you how I've been doing. Since March 15th, I've had moments of anger and sadness and discouragement. My wife's been a good sounding board for me. Our worship pastor, Aquila Bach, we tend to be made of the same cloth, and we've vented to each other about this. And I know the suffering of people over this virus has been so much worse than anything I'm saying today, but it doesn't lessen the heartache when your dream has been taken away. And for me, 40 years. Will I ever experience that again? About a month ago, I made the decision it's time to start crawling out of that. I began asking God, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to teach? What do you want me to know? What do you want our congregation to understand? And every time I prayed it, every time I thought it, every single time, the movement was back to that day in the life of Jesus when criticism and conflict is coming at every angle. Every time I ask, he said, go there. Every time. Everything took me back to that one day in the life of Jesus when Jesus said, pay attention when God points in a new direction. Pay attention to that. That's how he works. That's some of his best messages. The potential of a new chapter is to take you places you have never been. Now don't miss this, don't miss it. If your spirit is old and crusty and inflexible like an old worn out wineskin, then you won't be able to hold the blessing of the newness and you lose it all. And I don't want to be that. I want to be the shiny, pliable golf glove. I want to be the brand new wineskin that molds with the expansion of the new wine. And so next week, I want to talk about how we learn to do that in our life and pay attention to those moments of newness. But today, it's about us as a church. Because 2 weeks from this weekend, we begin a brand new journey that only God knows where it will lead. And I'm as excited as a 19-year-old preacher. And today, I want to invite you to join me on that road. So go get you a new wineskin. And let's see where this thing takes us.
What a great encouragement for us as a church. When God points in a new direction, there's so much hope, there's so much excitement. We love you, church. If you've not given online, you can go to our website, you can go to our app, be faithful to give in this time, and we cannot wait to see you again next week.